Is the law the best standard for what constitutes free speech? Is capitalism ruining video games? And are tax cuts the biggest driver of the United States deficit? We'll answer these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we gather takes from all across the internet. We evaluate them, give our opinion on them, whether they're good or bad, and try to have a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Britt, and I'm here with my co-host, Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe. Really helps us out. You can find us on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod, and on Instagram at Good Take Bad Take Pod. Without further ado, let's get into our first take. So this comes from Elon Musk, and he writes, "The extreme antibody reaction from those who fear free speech says it all. By free speech, I simply mean that which matches the law. I am against censorship that goes far beyond the law. If people want less free speech, they will ask government to pass laws to that effect. Therefore, going beyond the law is contrary to the will of the people." What do you think, Donnie?
This is a terrible take from Elon, and I mean it's just incredibly bad. The idea that free speech should one be defined in terms of what matches the law is that's a terrible way to define what you value on principle. Even still, what free speech means in the law is always subject to interpretation, but technically speaking, it goes far beyond what people normally attribute. That there's always the idiotic phrase, "You can't yell fire in a crowded theater." No, free speech means you literally can. The First Amendment literally means that you can do that, and that there are repercussions to it. Obviously, if for a private business owner, they would not invite you back to that establishment, etc. But legally speaking, you do have that protection. So it's even broader than generally people mean. But I think Elon's reasoning and his definitions here is just, it feels like he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, where he wants to be pro free speech, but he also doesn't want to be seen as, oh, well, I'm not like with the crazy extremists. And that to me is really disappointing, because the Overton window is shifted as such that you're weird if you think that absolute free speech should be and is the norm, which the reality dictates. Censorship is always a problem, and the difference between prohibiting and filtering and moderating speech in a private entity, that is way different than the idea of censorship. Those two concepts are not the same thing. And so when you're talking about free speech on Twitter, I'm not saying that you can't have standards by which you moderate the content. I don't think you have to hold that. But when he's using the definition of any censorship that goes far beyond the law, that to me is crazy and silly, because and just because the laws can be interpreted by any number of activist judges, and the law is not a principle. The law is something that will bend and change, and is to me, it's just a very flaky kind of way to define free speech. I also have problems with the latter half of this tweet, but I'll let you chime in here.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a rare Elon L, because every now and then he gets one pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's when he says, "I'm against censorship that goes far beyond the law. If people want less free speech, they will ask government to pass laws to that effect." It's like, well, by people, who do you mean? Like, do you mean 51%? Because that's really what's required, in the sense of democracy. The will of the people is 51%. And as we've seen, I mean, as Elon knows, the majority, much of the time, are not going to make the best decision. The majority in this country wanted to do certain things with the vaccine and with lockdowns and things like that, and was obviously wrong. And so what's to say that the majority is not going to get what should or should not be spoken, correct? And as you and I would say, like, that's best outsourced just to the market in general, right? Like, outsource that to the market, let individual businesses and people and outsource to the market under the parameters and boundary lines of property, right? So if you own property, if you own a space, if you have claim to something, you can dictate what is said or not said in that space. You also get to reap the consequences of whatever choice you get to make on that. So if you have a coffee shop and no one can say the word blue, It might, and if they say the word blue, they get kicked out, or maybe they can't say black, right, in your coffee shop, and every time someone asks for black coffee, you throw them out. It's going to be a big issue. So like that free speech and what is permitted and what should be permitted is best decided by the free market. And to me, I think that Elon is like trying to find a principle that like can always be applied. And to him, I'm not trying to be like an Elon whisperer or something like that, but what it seems like is like, oh, well, the principle is that the will of the people is best, and so therefore we're not going to do anything beyond, or the will of the people. But it's like, well, there's actually a better principle than that, which is freedom and individual liberty. And he seems to have been moving closer to that in recent days, and I hope he continues to.
I do too. I just have so much issue with how he structures this
Yeah.
last part of the tweet where he says if people want less free speech they will ask government to pass laws to that effect. I mean, that even assumes that government is effective at doing what it's supposed to do. Like, you're assuming, oh yeah, we do have a representative democratic republic that responds to the will of the people. So even if you take the premise that, the 51% dictating the other 49% is a good thing, you're assuming that that's what even happens in our state of government. And so that, to me, that's already the absurd notion. And the other aspect, of course, is that my right to free speech is not contingent on what other people think. And so defining free speech and how much free speech is allowed by the will of the people is just flawed from the beginning. That's like saying, well, we'll tolerate Donald living as long as the majority of people are okay with that. If the majority of people aren't okay with me living, guess what? I still have the right to life. And that's not a good, yeah, that's a moving goalpost, and it's a terrible metric by which you should measure the morality of something, or the rightness of something. If if you want to say for your private platform that I'm using the law as a framework of popular opinion on free speech, I still think that's flawed. But even willing it that way is maybe a better way to say than to pretend that somehow government laws actually reflect the will of the people, and then to say that going beyond the will the laws is contrary to the will of the people. One, I don't care if my opinion on free speech is with the majority or not. The reality is people have the right to express themselves, and they have the right to free speech regardless of how the majority feels. And so if you want to defend the principle of free speech, then you defend the principle of free speech. Don't defend the principle of free speech insofar as people are okay with it, because that will always snap back.
Yeah, I I mean, you saw what happened with his the new CEO of Twitter. I think her
Yes.
name's Linda. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Musk, right? Like it seems like he does one thing and then the other. And to me, I guess if you're going to think of someone that is playing 4D chess, he probably would be the guy to be doing that. But I agree, just in principle, it's like these things are like it'd be better to just toe a hard line and say like, yep, like freedom of speech, like based on private property. Elon Musk had a thing about Alex Jones,
Right,
with,
right.
and I was like, well, that's even though I disagree with this, right? Like that's like the best example of free speech within a private business being implemented, right? Like
100%.
Elon Musk is like, hey, like I have a general principle, I'm gonna follow it. I also really don't like, and in his opinion, Alex Jones is uh causing pain to the Sandy Hook victims and things like that, the families of the Sandy Hook victims, and I don't want to let him on, so I'm not going to let him on. And he reaped the consequences of having that stance, right? Some people left, some people criticized him, people that had traditionally been on his side criticized him and stuff like that. But that's like a great example of how it should be played out. That's like, well, why don't you just extend that liberty to everyone, right? So Elon, even in practice, Elon lives out our way of how free speech should be managed. It's just, yeah, he hopefully some of this other stuff that's going on continues that, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, and to point out for anyone listening, this tweet did come from about a year ago, so this isn't like a fresh take from Elon. I just saw it recirculating and wanted to address it.
All right. We have another Twitter user who shall remain nameless tweets out, like every kind of art, games and capitalism don't mix. If your focus is not just on being profitable, but becoming increasingly profitable year over year, then the only games you see as a success are games like Candy Crush. watching Blizz fall off is just painful, man. I'm assuming he's talking about Blizzard.
Yeah, yeah. This take, by the way, shout outs to my brother for sending it our way. Um, yeah, this was in light of Blizzard announcing that they are canceling a mode to Overwatch 2. That was one of the highlights and the promising the reason why they were making an Overwatch 2. The funny thing to me is um the there's a lot about this, but looking specifically at the Blizzard example before we move more broadly, to me, Blizzard is one of the examples of, like, if you're considering what they've produced to begin with, like art or games or entertainment and have value, then the market reaction is going to be painful. That Blizzard as a company has been in free fall for a long time because they haven't been doing things that created value. And now they've deceived a large portion of their consumer base that because of capitalism, they're going to pay for that. And that's just clear. So I don't think that this is the greatest illustration to demonstrate his point. But even still, the only way that someone even has the resources to make the foundation of something that you love, like Overwatch, and support it and create the infrastructure to support millions of people playing this online at the same time is because of capitalism, or is because you have enough value generated and that people pitch in and the success means they can sustain something and create newer and better things. Now that doesn't always pan out, and bad companies pay the price for that, and hopefully Blizzard will, and that takes a an invested consumer base for sure. But generally speaking, when a company year after year makes promises and fails to deliver, they either have to turn things around and deliver something that is good and does create value, or they go out of business. Otherwise, the problem is you have like all these really great works of art that never get seen, never get distributed, or don't even get to be made because you don't have the proper resources allocated in the right way. And so the idea that games and capitalism don't mix is just, it's very silly, because the entire leverage that games have to exist and to be shared widely is because of the free market to begin with.
Yeah, and I always find like the time horizon that people look at these things really funny because they're like the past 8 years, games have not been very awesome, and profit sucks. It's like, man, like something as crazy and innovative as as a game, like there's like decades of like time for things to sort themselves out, right? And for the market to correct itself. Like we have such a narrow view of like, well, games just suck and that means capitalism bad. It's like, no, like markets correct, right? Like we had a really good season of games that came out early mid 2000s, and then like this guy's saying, like companies start seeing like the MMO thing, right? They're like, oh well, now we can have increasing profits, we can have reoccurring revenue, all this stuff. So we're going to switch to that. And it was plentiful for a little bit, and then they started to see the shortfalls of it, and that players don't really like that. They like story based games that they're really well done, that don't have microtransactions and things like that. And a good example of this is like the Fallout series, right? Like Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, amazing selling games. I think Fallout 4 sold like 15 million copies. And it was like the last of the Fallout series where they only had like, it was like a traditional RPG, huge map. Everyone played it on their own, and it was awesome. And then you had Fallout 76, which is the market, because there's a delay between when a market decides to do something and when the game comes out, right? It's like 6 years. So during the MMO time, the Fallout studio said, hey, like, yeah, we made Fallout 4, but we're also going to release Fallout, 76. So we're going to start development on this MMO. And when it came out, the market had said, nah, we don't like that. And Fallout 76 sold 2 million copies, right? As opposed to the 15 million copies that Fallout 4 had sold. And now we're seeing like awesome single player games coming out again, right? Like Jedi Survivor, which I don't know if you've played it or anything, but it's awesome. Like it's a really fun game, single player, like, and they expanded on it. It's really great. We've got Starfield coming out for Xbox, which is like a return to form for Bethesda, which is like a single player game. All these things are awesome, and so like it takes time for the market to correct itself. And just because you're in the middle of a correction doesn't mean that the system is broken. It actually means that it's working. It means that like, oh yeah, like gamers played some of these things, and maybe you were able to like trick them and they didn't have the feedback like, oh, we don't want to play these for the first few games that came out, but eventually we get sick of it and we don't buy them. And when we stop buying them, the company's like, well shoot, we got to do something else. So then they start doing it, and they start investing in other properties. And and in games that are like that. But there's a delay, right? It's not just instant. The second you get feedback, you can't adjust, right? These are $100 million productions. They're really complicated. It's $100 million software project, right? Like it's so complicated to make happen, and you can't just change on a dime.
Well, and I was going to say to your point, I mean, the most recent release of amazing, incredible single player content is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, which just
Yeah,
came out, sequel to the very very high scoring like 100 10 out of 10 all across the board Breath of the Wild, and in about the same time they took to make the first one, they built on that and scored another 10 out of 10. Absolutely incredible game. In the first opening weekend, sold 10 million copies of this game in the 3 days. And it's worth it. And the entire reason that they're able to make something that is so incredible is because of the overwhelming success of the first one. And they took that and they expanded and they built and they have the resources. The problem with this idea that, oh, this art, let's say that we take capitalism out of the equation and we have some form of government funded, or let's not even go that dreary and drastic, but let's just say there's a lot more of a socialized system for things. And you have to, one, you have to pick and choose which kinds of games or art get created, because you know it's not a matter of an individual being able to take a risk with their own capital and then make that back. There's a limited supply of resources no matter what system you're in. And so because it's more controlled, there has to be some entity deciding what games do and don't make it. Now, every single person who's played video games pretty much has had games that they like that no one else did, and maybe they got popular later on, maybe they didn't. A lot of people are snobs about, oh, I played that game before it was popular. Great, cool. Or I love this small indie game that, it's not very popular, and it's so sad because capitalism means that only the big companies get to distribute their things. But the problem is those small indie projects don't get made in the other system because there's a limited number of resources. So people have to pick and choose what is valuable. They have to try to decide for everyone what is or isn't a worthy game to be made or to be created, or what is or isn't. Versus our current system where people like the creators of Cuphead can go out on a limb and make this indie game, just those two, and risk everything and make a smashing hit that just sold across the globe and is, and now it literally has a kids TV show, right? Or even Five Nights at Freddy's, which is getting a movie of all things.
yeah.
That was an individual guy who made his own risk by doing this independent game. And even for games that aren't as big as I'd like them to be, the very fact that they can exist and be appreciated by some people is more a testament to capitalism than not, because there are people who are able to do that on their own independently. They have the resources. They hopefully got enough return to make it worthwhile and maybe do more things. But without that system, you just limit the scope and the number of things that are available. Someone has to be centrally choosing that. And most likely it's not going to be you. And most likely the taste is going to be different. I mean, think about this, like mobile games are huge, and a lot of pushback on microtransactions have happened, but it's a big moneymaker. People always lament that. But frankly, mobile gaming has reached an audience far wider than traditional gaming ever did or
Yeah.
will. Just to be honest, like it's not like if you give every single person an iPhone game and you hand them an Xbox controller and tell them to play whatever game they want there, like a platformer or a shooter or an MMO or an RPG. Like there are people who don't want to get deep into games, and so the mobile market is for them, and that's fine. But the problem is if you have this like socialized of picking what is or isn't art, either you get the mobile games because it's going to appeal to a lot of people and you don't end up with the art at all, or two, you end up only with the art, and then a much more limited number of people are going to appreciate and even enjoy that, and then the people who would have enjoyed mobile gaming don't get access to any of that either. So capitalism and gaming, it's not a perfect relationship in that we live in a fallen world and nothing with capitalism will be perfect. But like you said, that's the beauty of capitalism, is it has a self-built-in correction method for when things aren't perfect, for when things go wrong and astray.
I chuckled when you said in this scenario, let's just take capitalism out of it and you can just
Yeah.
make art. It's like that literally you cannot do that like
Right,
with
right.
art, because the whole concept of making art is that you can't eat art. I mean, yes, there are bakers that consider what they do art, and I would agree in a lot of instances and things like that. But like in general, our traditional sense of like a painting as art or video game as art, you cannot eat an art, you cannot eat a video game, you cannot drink a video game. So therefore, there needs to be enough water and food and shelter stored up or capital to store it up so that those people can work on it for however long they need to work on it to build it. So, and like you're saying, it's like the person who has that capital, if they aren't also the artist, then they have to decide where they're best going to, put that capital. And it's either going to be, under the auspice of I want return. And usually, if you want a return, it's because you were able to assemble a lot of capital from a lot of different people, and they need a return as well. And that's what's crazy about. Then you were talking about this earlier. It's like it enables better and better games, right? The reason we have such amazing like capabilities now, like I think about playing, like I played the Medal of Honor game on GameCube,
Yeah,
um,
same.
and I just remember thinking like, this is so real, this is so amazing, this is awesome. And then I was like, out of curiosity, I was like, I wonder what that actually looked like. And so I Googled a pic, like YouTubed it. I was like, oh, like this looked awful. Like this looks terrible compared to today's games, and even games that don't have good graphics by today's standards look a lot better than it. The reason we made all those jumps is because artists were able to convince people with a lot of capital to give it to them. And part of that equation, if it's not, if it's one person and they don't want to return and they just like, oh, I just do it for the enjoyment of it. But in general, the more capital you have, the more return you need to generate. And so that's the balance that has to be struck. And I think capitalism regulates that really, really well.
And the last thing I'll say too is that the more free your society with free markets and things like that, even when there isn't a direct profit incentive for some aspects of gaming, like historic video game preservation, the great thing is people can choose to pool their resources and support foundations
Yeah.
that do that kind of work. Like the video game, I can't remember what it's called. It's like the video game history archive or something like that. There's a great organization that works to the preservation of all kinds of gaming stuff. And the best part is when you have a lot of capital in a system and all the rising tide lifts all boats, then people can donate to that because they have more capital to spend. When you make more things, you get more things generally. And when you earn that and you create value, then you can choose to allocate that value in different ways. So when I make money, I can choose to donate some to organizations that preserve the stuff that isn't as directly attractive for like big investments too. So you get both ends of the spectrum covered.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Moving on to our next one. Hold on. I was looking at the slides and I lost my tab. All
No,
right. Here we
no
go.
problem.
We've got an article from Wired, and this is what was the title?
Let me read. I'll read the title of the article with the subheading. The article is Pete Buttigieg loves God, beer, and his electric Mustang. Sure, the US Secretary of Transportation has thoughts on building bridges, but infrastructure occupies just a sliver of his voluminous mind.
And the this excerpt from the article isn't much better. As Secretary Buttigieg and I talked in his underfurnished corner office one afternoon in early spring, I slowly became aware that his cabinet job requires only a modest portion of his cognitive powers. Other mental faculties no kidding, are apportioned to the Iliad, Puritan historiography, and Nosgard's Spring, though not in the original Norwegian. Slacker. Fortunately, he was willing to devote yet another apse in his cathedral mind to making his ideas about three mighty themes: neoliberalism, masculinity, and Christianity intelligible. Oh, what do you think?
Oh, this is nausea inducing. This is so
When was
disgusting.
this written?
This was written recently. This is like
Oh no.
this was
See, I could
published.
understand this being written in at the beginning of his tenure in some ways. Like it passed, but it's like, man, now I understand why all the things are going wrong in
Yeah.
the transportation. Only a portion, a modest portion of his cognitive powers have been
Oh,
focused on the Ohio train,
yeah.
disaster.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. No. Yeah. This was May 10, and whew, yeah. This is terrible. People often, at least in my experience, they often don't relate to me when or maybe they just sort of give a little like a, oh yeah, kind of like a slight acknowledgement without a full acknowledgement of recognizing the hero worship that goes on with our politicians. I usually say it in the context of the presidency because that's where it is most prominent most of the time. But this article right now makes it so clear that it is far beyond just the presidency. And this is, Wired is a magazine that's, excuse me, more related to electronics and tech reviews and things like that. But they are a journalist organization, and no respectable journalist should be gushing over a politician like this. This, I mean, this is not any kind of helpful reporting. This is someone who has a political crush on this dude. And the idea too that it's like shocking that someone can have other interests than their job is also just really funny.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, this guy also likes, classic literature in some ways. Cool, so do I. And I also have a job of doing other things. Like, I don't know what this person expects. Like, maybe they're just the most boring human alive, but I don't know.
Yeah,
This
these
was
aren't
a very bizarre post to read
the
here.
prerequisite to these mental faculties of cognitive power cathedrals that this lady's talking about. The prerequisite to indulging them is the ability to read. Like, it's really not like, I mean, it's great. It's like, I mean, I'm not to like hate on reading. Like, it's an amazing thing and I love doing it, but it's not a crazy difficult thing, right? Like,
Right.
you read something that's like, you would never see this lady write this about Elon Musk, right? Who's like
Yeah.
running 3 companies, also an engineer, has 110 people directly reporting to him. It's like, that's like actual skill, hard skills that are being used in a day-to-day, basis. Like, and if he was the Secretary of Transportation and only a portion of his cognitive powers were dedicated to it, it's like, okay, well, that is actually impressive because like a portion of his cognitive power is probably like worth like the full amount of someone else's. But this is like, oh yeah, he reads great, and he's a little bit articulate, in his ability to communicate these ideas to you, who probably don't, you don't really read at all. So yeah, it's really like, it really takes the mask off of like who these people are rooting for. Like, you would never see this. I just saw this, and I'll send it to you after. This YouTube channel called Off the Grid did like a YouTube video on Thomas Massey and his like
Yes.
homestead. Have you
I
seen
think I've
it?
seen it.
Dude,
Yes.
it is so amazing, man. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, this is the guy, like, I want him to represent me. Like, I'll move to Kentucky to be
Right.
represented by him because this guy figured out, like, one, he had a big career in virtual reality, did a lot of cool stuff, made it so that like users could see an object in virtual reality and have the tactile sense that comes from it, return to the gloves or whatever you were using, so you could actually feel it in space. Sold that company, moved to Kentucky, built his entire huge, beautiful, amazing house, all from materials that he found on his own land from the farm that he bought. So like totally like didn't bring stuff in from outside. Like, I'm sure he brought in drywall and stuff, but like the frame, all the stone and the siding and stuff like that is from his own property. So like the most like intensive things. And then, like, he just engineered the crap out of that place. He is fully self-sufficient on electricity from solar. He's got like this electric go-kart. Like, that's someone that you would want to like. That's an interesting person, right? That's someone that's like, wow, like, how do you do be a congressman as well as like maintain this incredible homestead and all these different things? It's not someone that just read the Iliad. Like, everyone in high school read the Iliad, dude. Like, I mean, maybe they don't anymore, but I did, like, when I was in homeschool high school. So it's just like, I don't know, like, these people, it shows you that they have a political agenda, or that this reporter's like view scope of like who she talks to is so small and myopic. Like, it's just really embarrassing and like, ugh.
Yeah, I think part of what makes me so just antipathetic towards it is how just like gaga this person
Yeah.
is. That the he's willing to this sentence. Fortunately, he was willing to devote yet another apse of in his cathedral mind to making his ideas about three mighty themes: neoliberalism, masculinity, and Christianity intelligible to me. Like, what kind of puff piece is this? It is disgusting. If you wanted to say that Buttigieg was a very impressive, intelligent individual, and you found him that, you know what, fine. But writing in this way, it makes it seem so non-objective and just disgusting that I can't take it seriously at all.
And these are things that you write about, like, your hero maybe, or someone that's, like,
Right,
personally made a really huge impact on your life through time and patience and just like slogging it out, you know. And I could write something about this, about people that have dedicated like hours and months and years of time pouring into my life, not expecting anything into return. Mentors, professors, you know, people like that. It still wouldn't be as flowery as this, but it would be in the same vein. And I can't help but think that maybe this person just doesn't have anyone like that in her life, right? And that's what's
right.
kind of sad about it. And so, and I think a lot of people don't have that, and so they project that onto politicians and celebrities and stuff like that. So just maybe as me kind of thinking more about the heart of the issue, it's still just like nausea inducing. And
Yeah.
I hope that, you know, maybe she'll meet someone else who can read and she'll be equally impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
All right. Moving on to our next one, we've got frequently featured Robert Reich, and he tweets out, remember, one of the biggest deficit drivers of the past 20 years are GOP tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. The issue isn't programs that help millions of Americans, it's giveaways to the rich. Is RBR right here, Donnie?
Yet another fat L for this dude.
Yeah.
Um, let's so I think this is actually a very good example of factual but not truthful,
Yeah.
because yes, technically speaking, tax cuts for corporations or for anyone does drive up the deficit. But the problem isn't that we have a tax cutting problem. The issue is that we have a spending problem. It's, it's this kind of thinking reminds me of that meme where it gets substituted for a lot of different things depending on the example, but like it'll be an individual being like, please help, I'm starving, I can't afford anything, help me sort my budget. And then it'll be a line item of their budget, and it'll be all normal stuff like rent, like $2,000, and like monthly food like $400, and electricity, and then it'll be some ridiculous item like candles, $3,500. And then someone replies, stop spending more, so much on candles, and then they'll reply no. That's the meme, the joke. They're like, help,
Yeah.
help, I can't. And then there's the stupid, very obvious solution there. And that's what it feels like with this government, where he's like, oh my gosh, we're cutting taxes again, and the deficit's growing. It's like, yeah, then just stop spending in mountainous amounts of money, and then the tax cuts don't matter. I mean, the fact that you're complaining about returning people's money that you're taking from them to begin with is wrong. But even if you want to look at this from the sort of the white paper Cato Institute perspective, just stop spending so much, and then the tax cuts aren't the big problem. And it's like, you don't even have to take from the poorest of the poor if you really don't want to, in terms of your spending. Like, you could cut from the military and that would do it, as well as social services in general. But yeah, so this is just a very mixed up perspective.
Yeah. Like the analogy I would put to this is like, you're in the, you know, the hull of a boat. It's you, the captain of the boat, and then some madman with a drill drilling holes in the bottom of the boat, and it's starting to like take on water. And the captain's like, hey man, you got to hurry up and start plugging those holes, you know, with this goop that I've given you. And so you start going to work and you're plugging all the holes and stuff. And like, man, I'm really tired, my back is hurting. And he's like, dude, why are you causing this boat to sink? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, no, gosh darn it. It's the guy, the madman drilling the holes in the boat that's causing this. Why don't you stop him? And this is Gene Epstein, who I think we've featured some of his takes on here before, posted a chart under this, which I thought was really funny. And I knew it was true. I just didn't know the exact numbers behind it. But it showed it had two lines on it. It had the outlay of taxpayer dollars, or the spending of the government, and then the receipts, right, from taxpayers in 2022. And it's like the past 100 years, 2022 was like only a couple percentage points behind like the top of the past 100 years in terms of receipts for taxes, right? So we collect the most taxes in 2022, almost the most amount of taxes in 2022 in the past 100 years from people ever. So it's basically ever, right? Since they started tracking this sort of thing. And yet it still doesn't even come close to touching the actual amount of outlays, right? So the issue is not on a tax base as much as we have a principle, take issue with that. Uh, but yeah, this is like it's literally like you're getting mad at the guy plugging the holes, taking a break, versus the guy that's just freaking trying to actually sink the boat. It's like if you want to solve the problem and you want to solve it sustainably, it's like you got to stop spending money,
Yeah.
man. Like that's the only way for this to happen. And I think what I talked about, I had a friend of mine say to me like, and this is not someone I try to argue with because it just doesn't go anywhere. But she was talking about like, oh yeah, like these Republicans are so dumb. They don't understand, the debt ceiling. It's not the same as a house credit card. It's way more complicated than that. It's like in some ways it is, but the principle is the same. It's like we spend more money than we take in, and even now the debt we have on a credit card, the interest on it is more than we take in, or it's approaching. So, I mean, it's not really that hard to understand in that way. I mean, it's just finance. Credit cards are finance as well as the national debt. So, yeah, we need to, you and I would just abolish all the taxes anyways. So I guess everything would be, according to RBR, terrible and bad at that point. But it would be bad for some people, actually, the people
Y-
that leech off of the taxpayer. But probably great for everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's just so disingenuous, this last line. Like, the issue isn't programs that help millions of Americans, it's giveaways. It's like, well, technically speaking, it's both.
Yeah.
And especially because of the example, how it's just so much disproportionately higher in terms of the spending than it is the taking. Um, but again, the other thing that he completely ignores is just the disproportionate amount of payment that rich people already contribute to the system. So the number one answer that they'll never be able to give you a principled answer on, or a hard number, is how much is enough for a rich person to pay in taxes? How much is their fair share? That is always a moving target. It's always a moving goalpost, because it's the answer is more than what they're paying now. And so the issue for him would never be the government spending programs. It would always be quote unquote giveaways to the rich, even if that means they get to keep 1% of their income that they earn.
All right, moving on to our last one. We've got Dave Smith at Comic Dave Smith, libertarian podcaster, and he writes, the Durham report gives us more information about what was already clear. The last president was framed for treason by his own intelligence agencies in an attempted coup. Truly one of the craziest stories in U.S. history. What do you think? Is it one of the
I,
craziest?
it's funny because I think this is a good take in general. I think truly one of the craziest might be a little bit of hyperbole. In that I actually I don't think it's, I mean, it's notable, it's huge, but as far as like crazy things, it's actually kind of like, yeah, no, this makes sense. Like this is the inheritance of J. Edgar Hoover. This is the inheritance
Mm,
of the entire system of a federal bureaucracy gaining more power because presidents were too lazy to approve things every year, and they let bureaucrats approve things directly themselves, and they allowed bureaucrats to tell Congress what they needed rather than having, Congress, or I can't remember what the exact order was, but it used to be that, I think, like, the president asked Congress for the funds to give to the bureaucratic programs, and then they got lazy, so they said just have the bureaucrats ask Congress directly. And then it was more like, no, the bureaucrats are telling Congress what they're getting, not them going to the president and the president asking Congress and stuff. So you just remove the levels of or you add levels of autonomy to these bureaucrats, and then what do you know? The intelligence agencies, which are bureaucrats, don't like the guy in charge. They're going to attempt a coup, in a sense. And so to me, it is crazy. It's noteworthy. I don't know if it's the craziest story in U.S. history necessarily, but it makes sense, because like that's
yeah.
where the path has been leading. And to me, the crazier thing is the level of denial that the average person has that this is happening, because they are so bought into the narrative that the mainstream media, well, sorry, the corporate media will sell them.
Yeah, I mean, we would if you were to list like the craziest political campaign scandals, maybe in U.S. history, I think up there would be Watergate, right? Most people would
Right.
think of that. And if you think about Watergate in comparison to what happened in the 2016 election as well as beyond it, It's like it pales in comparison, right? Like Nixon ordered a couple agents to do some stuff. The sitting president ordered an entire organization to go after the rival of his former Secretary of State. It's like, yeah, that's a lot bigger deal than any of this stuff. And on top of that, they knew, like they fraudulently went after him. They knew that none of the data was good. I mean, the Durham report, you should read. Everyone should read the executive summary because they have it. The Durham report essentially says, yeah, like if they had done all the normal due diligence that's like part of the manual on how you like evaluate whether this data should be taken seriously. If they'd done any of that, they would have realized none of this could be corroborated. None of this was actually factual. None of this was warranted opening an investigation over. But they ignored all of that. And the way they get away with not being criminally charged is that everyone did just a small bit of it, right? Like I heard one podcaster put it like the way they kind of covered their tracks is like if you're doing a bank robbery, you have one person, open the door, you have another person like write a note and throw it in through the window, and then you have another person go in and say like, "Hey, I found this note out there." And you kind of just like you isolate every single step, and then eventually the money ends at your hideout. It's like, well, none of us actually robbed the bank. I just wrote a note and I just opened the door. That's essentially what happened with this whole deal. Everyone knew it was going bad. The Hillary Clinton campaign literally was like, "Hey, we're going to try and pin Trump as like a Russian, a Russian asset. We're going to try and put that out there." The intelligence agency said, "Oh, well, we heard a rumor about it, so we need to open up an investigation." And then Hillary Clinton turned around and said, "Oh yeah, like if my story's true, their FBI is investigating him." It's like, oh, like this is like a self-perpetuating, like infinite ability to make whatever you want become true. It's the Thanos with the glove. Reality can become whatever I want. Moment. And then the corporate press got in on it, and they're like, "Well, we heard rumors about it, and the FBI are saying it, so we can now say that we're doing, that it's true." And then the FBI uses the press reports as like, "Oh, well, we need to investigate these claims that are coming out." So it was just this. You realize like they had this beautiful little system, and then Durham caps off the investigation saying, "Well, the FBI's fixed all of it, so it's all good. So I don't recommend criminal charges." It's like, dude, well, how have they fixed this whole thing, right? Like they have this perfect like system for creating these controversies in place. What's to say that they're not using that, right? To or not going to use it in the future? It's obvious that everyone's in bed together and doing, they're all working in the same hive mind. And conveniently, even though everyone only took their own individual little choices, it ended up with this huge story and tens of millions of dollars from the Mueller investigation into Trump and basically hamstringing his presidency.
Yeah, and the problem is that most people will hear all that and think, "Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist,"
Yeah.
because the one of the greatest gaslighting jobs that they've done is convince people that if it's a conspiracy theory, then it has no merit, or that conspiracies never happen, or whatever you want to, however you want to quantify that. Um, so yeah, absolutely wild stuff, and I think what the white pill in all of this is the fact that it feels like these things have been less and less. I don't know they've been less professional in how they've been done, or maybe just the access to leaks and sort of the curtain being pulled from the wall has been more apparent. But more and more people are distrusting the narrative, and they're realizing that these kinds of things happen not in storybooks but in reality.
Yeah.
And so fewer and fewer people are going to the people who are going to, I don't know, what the word, gaslight them, I guess. uh and so more prominent voices will be speaking to more people who generally wouldn't believe this kind of thing. And I'm just, hopefully the more the message gets out, the more people realize, wow, this is actually being said from a lot of people, that maybe there's some truth to this, and look into it for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, at least you've got the venerated FBI report that says Trump's exonerated, right? So when
Right.
people try and say these things like, "Nope, that's not true," and well, how do you know? It's like, well, the FBI said so. Like, it's kind of nice to be able to have that
Right.
on the side of truth for once. But I mean, what's crazy is people just memory hold this stuff, right? Like they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that was going on. That's cool that they figured it out." It's like, no, you don't realize like this was like you don't remember that this was a huge deal. Like everyone was talking about how Trump must be a Russian asset.
Right.
I one of my buddies was talking about it all the time. I was like, I don't believe it. And I read the Mueller report, and I was like, did you read it? And he's like, no, I didn't read it. I was like, well, it basically found nothing, man. So I don't know what you're saying about this stuff. But these people just forget and they move on. But hopefully, at least one person has changed and gets red pilled and awakened to the fact of how nefarious our deep state overlords are.
Yeah, well, we can hope. We can hope.
We can help. All right, folks. I think that's going to be our show for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Again, always helps us out if you like, share, subscribe. And if you have any takes that you find you want us to get our take on it, please send them our way. And we'll catch you on the next one.